You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday, 14th of September. Rogue trader loses his bank £1.4 billion in the biggest fraud ever. Midsummer falls prey to political correctness. Mindless thug shoots Toby, 8. From the belly of the beast with Nick Griffin, MEP. British and German embassies under attacks from militant Islam. Fuego volcano erupts in Guatemala. Thought for the day, Hillsborough, are we going overboard? And finally, cheerio from Tabu, a John Cleese moment. UK news. Kweku Adoboli, 32, an investment banker with the Swiss bank UBS, who believed he had the magic touch, gambled away £1.4 billion in 2 years, which knocked 10% or £2.8 billion off UBS shares. He has been accused of inventing fake deals to cover the enormous losses. The trial at Southwark Crown Court heard that the banker has been charged with false accounting and fraud between October 2008 and September 2011. Adoboli apparently sidestepped his bank's rules and then cooked the books to cover the losses. Sasha Voss, QC prosecuting, stated, to put a huge trading loss in some sort of perspective, $2.3 billion is enough to pay a year's salary for nearly 70,000 new nurses, or 2 Wembley stadiums, or perhaps even 6 new hospitals. Midsummer Murders has fallen prey to the political correctness and will feature 2 Asian actors in the future. Brian True-May, who produced Midsummer, became the centre of a race row after claiming his show was the last bastion of Englishness because it didn't feature any ethnic minorities, and he was forced to step down. Ace Batty and Sarai Radford will play a father and daughter in the next episode of the popular ITV series, marking the start of a new commitment by executives to make the show more representative. A World at 8 reporter commented, well, it had to come. The one reason this show has been so popular is that we in the UK are trying to forget we are being overrun in the media. Historical plays are very well received for just that reason, unless they make Hamlet black or something ridiculous like that. I can see no reason why we should incorporate ethnic actors just for the sake of doing so. Meanwhile, we have Asian reporters, weather people, commentators and presenters and shoals of actors. How about transferring them all to Al Jazeera, for their own safety of course. I just hope these 2 aren't a permanent fixture, or I will simply turn off. I still like to have a say in who I share my drawing room with. Brian was right, ITV are wrong. A brute shot 8-year-old Toby, a large white cat, with an air rifle from around 50 feet whilst Toby was hunting mice on farmland near his home in Moberly, Cheshire. This thug left Toby with such severe injuries that his front leg had to be amputated. Despite his terrible wounds, poor Toby managed to limp home and was found by his owner, Georgina Holt, 26, covered in blood in the back garden. The vet tried to save the leg, but the pellets had shattered the bone. Police are conducting inquiries, but Miss Holt blames the Xbox culture and computer games. She said they just shoot to kill on screen and do not seem to know the difference when it comes to real life. She is heartbroken for Toby because he was such an active cat and now his short life is diminished. A World at 8 writer commented, I included this in the main news because it shows the general lack of respect for life from the youth today and also a rather nasty side to the human character. And of course, Toby is white. Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, and his report today.
I've always approved of, though I regret to say haven't always obeyed, the first rule of holes. When in a hole, stop digging. So I had to laugh when a large majority of MEPs this week voted through a report calling for European Banking Union. The proposal is, of course, perfectly in keeping with Commissioner Barroso's repeated assertion that the solution to the problems caused by Europe is more Europe. These people are so isolated that I think they really do believe their own fantasy has become real. When, one fine day, the appalling consequences of their utopian extravagance tip the swinish multitude of decent, ordinary tax-paying citizens into marching on the European Parliament to burn it to the ground, I suspect that Mr Barroso, or whatever clone has by then replaced him, will hear the distant roar of the approaching mob, and, just like Ceausescu, the Romanian communist dictator in 1989, will believe they're coming to applaud him and his colleagues on their great work. Only when he sees the ropes will the 10-cent piece drop, but they're actually there to lynch him. And, when the history of how it all unravelled comes to be written, you can bet you by them worthless euro that the decision to use the consequences of their own folly as the excuse for a European banking union will feature in at least the footnotes. To have banks run by banksters is bad enough, but at least banksters are quite often competent at what they do, and at least they sometimes make a profit when they rip the rest of us off, and a bit of that profit ends up getting paid back in tax. But Eurocrats never make a profit. They never give anything back, not money, power, or freedom. That's why, if the peoples of Europe, including the British, want their money and their sovereignty and their freedom back, they'll have to stop tut-tutting over their Daily Mails and Figaros and Zeitungs and fight to get them back. We're not there yet, but it's getting closer every day. Another report passed this week will also hasten the process of public disillusionment with the EU. The Salavrakos Report on reform of Common Fisheries Policy. Now, the CFP certainly does need reforming, or much better, it needs scrapping, with Britain taking back control of our own fishing grounds, surrendered by the Tory traitor Ted Heath, to become more than half of the so-called EU common resource. But one reform that is utterly misguided, in fact utterly repulsive, is the proposal, passed along with the rest of the report, to control the number of seals, cormorants, and other natural predators on fish. This is on the grounds that these wonderful creatures, which have, naturally, fished the waters around our coasts for much longer than we have, are eating too much fish. And since industrial overfishing, destroying the seabed by bottom trawling, and catching and throwing back millions of tons of fish are causing a catastrophic drop in fish stocks, the answer, according to the majority of MEPs, from the short-sighted, short-termist, materialistic parties that dominate Strasbourg and Brussels, is to kill the seals, sea lions and seabirds that compete with the awesome destructive capacity of technologically magnified man. Can you imagine anything more grotesque, more sickening, more truly shocking? It's on a par with the Chinese communists in the 1960s, who worked out that the sparrows and other small birds of China were eating lots of grain that could be used to feed more little Chinese communists. So they organised that whole sprawling human ant heap of a nation to get up one morning and chase the flocks of birds from one place to another until they dropped dead to the ground, exhausted, and were killed by the millions. With the result that, within a few months, China was beset by a plague of various insects, and even Chairman Mao and his lunatic henchmen realised they'd made a mistake. By the way, Commissar Barroso started his career as a Maoist, an avowed admirer of the worst mass murderer in human history. The mass slaughter of marine mammals and birds now being planned by the EU wouldn't, of course, lead to any change in the fish stocks, because the fish not eaten by seals will in any case be hoovered up by the industrial fishing fleets of Spain and assorted other countries to which successive treacherous British governments have given unfettered access to our waters. So the seal slaughter plan will achieve nothing, except to enrage literally millions of animal lovers when they hear about it, particularly in Britain, because, the now vanished wrong of battery hens and pigs, and a continued shame of ritual slaughter notwithstanding, our reputation as a nation of animal lovers is very well deserved. I can't for the life of me think how the animal welfare people missed this report. UKIP, to their credit, voted against it. But why the hell didn't Nigel Farage's small army of researchers spot it as it passed through his Fisheries Committee and sound the alarm ages ago? A concerted lobbying campaign, complete with cuddly toy seals being shot and clubbed and hacked to pieces in a welter of tomato ketchup, could have frightened the majority of MEPs into voting down these thoroughly immoral plans. Fortunately, it's not too late. The report was just that, a document which goes back to the Commission to become the basis of a future set of proposals for new EU laws. So there is still time for the animal welfare lobbyists and for the Daily Mail and other media creeps who make money out of legitimate public outrage to cause such a stink over the seal slaughter plan that it never actually makes it to the EU's enormous list of laws, rules and regulations. So get writing, people, get writing. Sound the alarm and, I'll say it before anyone else, save our seals. Because campaigns can, sometimes, really make a difference, as we've seen this week. My heart went out and my hat came off to the families of the 96 victims of the Hillsborough disaster for their 23-year fight for recognition and the truth about the police negligence and class-based callousness that left so many fans of one of England's, in fact the world's, greatest football clubs dead. and against the cover-up and vilification organised by the police, ambulance service, and especially Rupert Murdoch's horrible rag, The Sun. It's great to see the truth come out at last, but I hope the campaigners won't stop there, because justice still has not been done. Justice will be the jailing of every one of the police officers who killed those 96 innocent fans, together with every media hack and politician who conspired to cover it all up. Speed the day. Finally, what do I think of the controversy and murders unleashed by Mohammed, the movie? Well, it reminds me of Oscar Wilde's description of fox hunting as the unspeakable in pursuit of the uneatable. I really don't know who is more dangerous and more despicable, the crazed Islamist mobs, or the clique of equally vicious Zionist fanatics, crackpot end-time Christians, and neocon warmongers, who are going so far out of their way to offend every Muslim on the planet. I've not lost any sleep over the fact that an American ambassador, who played an active role himself in handing Libya over to this psychopathic Islamism, ended up being raped, murdered, and dragged dead through the streets by Islamist psychopaths, who did to him exactly what he helped them to do to Gaddafi. What goes around comes around. We told them what would happen, and now it's happening. But the neocon or Zionist provocation, and the Muslim overreaction to it, also adds to the dangers faced by young English lads walking home after a pint or two near the edges of the ghettos of Oldham and other occupied British towns. And it adds to the risks faced by their older brothers and sisters out in Afghanistan, where they shouldn't even be, and wouldn't be if it wasn't for the criminal alliance of Zionist fanatics, neocon crooks, greedy corporations, and their political puppets who dragged us into war. These are the intended consequences of that provocation that I find the most unacceptable. If these two groups of equally unappealing fanatics want to offend and murder each other in pursuit of an ancestral quarrel and over a bit of scrubby desert, that's their problem. But any of them who try in any way to prosecute their quarrel on our streets, or demand restrictions on our freedom of speech, for which generations of our people have fought and died, should be frog-marched onto the next plane back to the Middle East. And anyone who claims to be a British or English patriot, but who pushes for us to take one side or the other, whether it be the Nazi cranks who say we should side with the Muslims, or the civic opportunists who say we should side with the Zionists, should be ashamed of themselves. The true nationalist position is very simple and very clear. A pox on both their houses. Britons fight for Britain only.
Thank you, Nick, for giving us plenty of food for thought this weekend. World news. British and German embassies have been attacked by rioters in Khartoum as protests spread over the anti-Islam film The Innocence of Muslims. In scenes that harked back to the violent protests that spread through Cairo last year, thousands more protesters advanced on the US embassy near Tahrir Square. 10,000 Muslims staged a protest in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka, during which they burnt the US flag. Since a 14-minute trailer for the movie was posted on YouTube by its American producers, turmoil has spread across the Muslim world. Protests have erupted in a string of countries across the Middle East and Africa, including Egypt, Lebanon, Qatar, Bangladesh, Kashmir, Pakistan, as well as the Sudan. Egypt's president appealed for calm on live television, but the Muslim Brotherhood are calling for more protests in Egypt after prayers today. A World Today writer comments, "I have not seen this short film yet, but everyone should realise that if you do anything, and I mean anything, on Muhammad, whether complimentary or not, somewhere or everywhere there are Muslims with nothing to do but protest and kill and destroy in the name of Islam, which is of course the religion of peace. That is after all why they killed the US ambassador in Libya." America, England and the world were warned on World at 8 that these Muslim Democrats would bite the hand that feeds them, and it has. They will continue to rake up any old excuse to kill Christians and just about everyone who is not a Muslim. That is the way it is and will be until they are stopped. It has been reported from Guatemala that the Volcan del Fuego, which is 6 miles southwest of the city of Antigua, has erupted, spewing smoke and ash into the sky. The Red Cross was called in to help with the evacuation of children and disabled residents. The head of emergency evacuation, Sergio Cabanas, said at least 17 villages have been evacuated, which involve more than 33,000 people. The ash is blowing south-southeast and authorities say the tourist centre is not in danger, but the eruption is expected to last 12 more hours. It was described as a paroxysm of an eruption taking place, a great volcanic eruption with strong explosions and columns of ash, said Gustavo Chicna, a volcanologist with the National Institute of Seismology, Volcanology, Meteorology and Hydrology. Thought for the day: the Hillsborough disaster. Now I'm probably going to make myself unpopular here by not joining with the current trend of emotion and guilt. I'm going to read the Wikipedia version of the Hillsborough disaster, somewhat shortened. Now I lived through this, and at the time it was considered a terrible accident, which I still think it was. I cannot speak for a Liverpool resident because I was not there, and I thankfully did not lose a member of my family there, but I'm not attempting to denigrate the loss of life or the sadness of losing a relative, but I am just attempting to create some space around the general hysteria of the press, who have lost the Jubilee, Olympics and Paralympics, and might have to report something relevant to the country as a whole one day. This is what Wikipedia state. Both clubs contested the semi-final of the FA Cup at a neutral venue, with Hillsborough being selected by the Football Association. The stadium was segregated between the opposing fans. South Yorkshire Police chose to place the Nottingham Forest fans in the Spion Kop end, the largest section of the stadium, despite Liverpool being regarded as having a larger fan base. On the day of the game, Liverpool fans arrived at their designated stand at Leppings Lane, passing through a number of turnstiles. As it became visibly overcrowded before kick-off, police ordered a large exit gate, Gate C, to be opened, allowing supporters to enter straight down a tunnel leading directly to two pens. The influx caused crushing, with fans climbing over side fences to escape. Moments after kick-off, a crush barrier broke, and fans began to fall on top of each other. The game was stopped after 6 minutes, although not officially abandoned until half-time. To carry the injured, supporters tore down advertising hoardings and emergency services were called in to provide first aid. Of the 96 fatalities, 14 were admitted to a hospital. The official inquiry into the disaster, the Taylor Report 1990, concluded that the main reason for the disaster was the failure of police control. The findings of the report resulted in the elimination of standing terraces at all major football stadiums in England, Wales and Scotland. The disaster happened because most of the fans entering the terraces headed for the central pens 3 and 4, as directed by the large notice pointing them that way above the tunnel. Normally a police officer or steward would direct fans away from full pens, but on that day this did not happen. There were no stewards in that area. The official capacity of these pens was around 2,000, but the Health and Safety Executive later found that this should have been reduced to around 1,600, as the crush barriers did not conform to the Guide Safety at Sports Grounds 1986. It is estimated that more than 3,000 people were in these pens shortly after kick-off at 3 p.m. This overcrowding caused the fatal crash. Now, as to the manufacturer's statements to comments of drunkenness and overcrowding, the police do not shine, and I'm not going to back them up in any way. But if you listen to what happened, the overcrowding aspect was true. Even if you look at the photos and videos, you can see there are literally thousands of people packed into that stadium. It was a popular game, so it would be. There was alcohol inside, and I would think some people had been drinking, and why not? Who would think that an awful stumble by someone could lead to a panic-induced massive crush that killed 94 people on the spot? The unnecessary statement by the medical examiner that some people would have lived had medical aid been on the spot is cruel. In such a muddle of hundreds of bodies, they couldn't have got to the poor devils anyway in good time, even if they'd tried, let alone had the space around to attempt resuscitation. That fact has just made their loss much worse for the relatives. The police were at fault for keeping the mass of people inside, the cover-ups and the lack of communication to the rescue services where precious time was lost. But are we going on a witch hunt here? Are we succumbing to the now ever-present British and maudlin attitude of how, why and where, and the compensation culture? The police will be pilloried, and rightly so in some cases, but we all know as soon as the legals get their hands on anything, there will be money and lots of it involved. Not just for the survivors and relatives, but for the legal teams as well. Time, as we know, is money, and this has been 23 years in the making. Does sacking a few high-flying policemen really take the awfulness away of what happened? I'm sure if the relatives get hefty payouts for trauma and the possibility of it never having happened at all, will it satisfy this national urge to blame someone or something for what is in truth a terrible accident which was not helped by the human factor and timing? I hope not. One would think God is not that cruel, but men make their own decisions in life, and for so many a visit to the footy that day in April was life-changing, and for those who lost loved ones I am truly saddened. A 55-year-old domestic parrot has died after squawking his last word, cheerio. The African grey parrot Tabu, thought to be one of the world's oldest domestic parrots, uttered his final farewell to Nina Morgan, 89, as she made her way to bed. When she came down the next morning he was sitting there on his perch, but too weak to say his usual greeting of "Hello, my darling." Just a small squeak, and that was that. Mrs Morgan thinks his longevity was due to a life of being spoilt, munching Kit Kats and watching soaps every night on the TV. Tabu was rescued from an animal trader in Tanzania in 1957 and was once taken into police custody after going missing. He was a great and constant companion and will be missed by all who heard him. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very safe and a very happy weekend.